back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. Not sure what to call this episode. Usually like to say, we're going to talk about this today. I know exactly what I want to talk about, but I'm not quite sure what to call it. So, you know right now what this is called, and I don't. He smoked this little honey cigar. It's called Havana Honey. It's not made in Havana. Probably has no honey in it. So I got to thinking, and this has to do with some research I did a couple of years ago, where, when you look at scientific process, scientific method, and you try to build experiments, it requires that you can measure all of the elements that you are trying to incorporate into your test. If you want to look for gravity, then you have this impression of gravity because you see things fall. That's the word you've given it. And then you have to hypothesize why or how this thing could be happening. Unfortunately, we do know that scientific method could be extremely misleading because once a mathematical algorithm yields a correlating group of numbers to what you're observing, you automatically validate the mathematics for your experiment. You say, we've done it. This is it. This is, the very first try sort of thing, right? I guess it's been about 3 years now. I spent a whole summer down at my local beach. I've talked about this a couple times in season 1, where I just sat around and started looking at the world a little bit differently. I had just gotten into the Fibonacci algorithm, the golden mean, where it appears as if a core life energy seems to be spinning in a 360 trajectory, whereby it seems to be sort of infinitely diminishing at times. You look at the thorns on a stem. The thorns pop out of the stem in a perfect 360 distribution. You look at, obviously, the the design of a seashell, the way that it goes in on itself, little fractal pattern. But I started to say, what we are, this is before I made this show, so the show's got all this information embedded in it, so it's going to seem silly me looking backwards on this, but, obviously life force is something that we don't track. And because we don't track it, science with a capital S, the replacement religion for spirituality and enlightenment and atomistic beliefs, can make you believe that it doesn't exist. Because if it existed, wouldn't we be able to track it? And it's like, okay, Mr. Scientist, did they have Geiger counters back in the Egyptian days? No. Did invisible radiation kill Madame Curie? Yes. So we have to assume that there's other dimensions of reality, which is merely, again, a metric of measurement. There was an interesting episode of Star Trek Next Generations where Mr. Barclay, he's sort of this odd character played by this brilliant actor. I don't remember his name, but Lieutenant Barclay, he gets augmented like the Burgess Meredith Twilight Zone, where he's super duper smart, has a lot of confidence, and he goes in and he works out an algorithm with Einstein in the holodeck. And there's an interesting thing, because Star Trek dialogue in the Next Generations is often ridiculing anyone who didn't believe in science with a capital S. He was trying to help Einstein integrate general relativity into quantum mechanics. And there was a line where Einstein said, I think it was Einstein, one of the two characters said, if this is true, then instead of 10 dimensions of reality, there's 26, I think. And I don't think I could deal with that. And the other guy says, yeah, me neither. I don't want to deal with that. And I think it's interesting that within that show, they showed you the cowardice of the human mind, and that this was too difficult to deal with, and so we can't have perhaps what is reality. Now, I think today we're well over 30 dimensions of reality. I'm going to guess that there's probably infinite dimensions, but that's just me. Could you imagine the entire infinite universe being fit into 50 dimensions? Doesn't that sound kind of amazing? But that's not what this is about. What this is about is the following. I think that for us to fully enlighten, or to begin the process of enlightening, we are going to have to start measuring reality in a very literal way. Start to be able to have conversations about the various aspects of our existence. And not feel weird about it, but to simply acknowledge it and move on and start to have a heightened level of consciousness and awareness of these other dimensions of reality such that we can, of our existence, such that we can start having intelligent conversations and seeing if we can get past this crayon drawing of our existence. So what am I talking about? Well, if you watch all the shows, and if I can get these out in generally the order that I recorded them, you're going to see an evolution of my own mind sort of right in front of your face. The big question that comes into mind is, what do we know about reality? Like, what do we know that exists, and what do we suspect might exist? For some weird reason, we have arbitrarily said to ourselves that the mass that you can feel with your hands, which is just merely an illusion of electricity going up to this neural net here, right? Before you get to other levels of consciousness. Somehow, people around us have said that is reality. It's arbitrarily reality. And I can't for the life of me figure out why I think this is more real than the emotions that I have. I mean, I think my emotions are real, but this is super duper real. For some weird reason, this neural pattern of electricity, of recognition, feels like it's massively lucid. But then when I dream, even though my mind, or however dreams are created, can create some of the most detailed environments, it is not as detailed as this reality when you really look at it, you know. But think about how much of a box you get put in immediately when you start to believe that this, again, there's infinite things going on right now in your life. I got a little breeze on me. I've got sunlight on me. I got sound popping in from little birds to the neighbor walking in another house to all these different things. But the one that I choose to really acknowledge is real is touch, the sense of touch. It's weird. Now, granted, the five senses that we have are very recognized as our reality. So now, let's go to the other side of the fence. Consciousness. We also all know that we have consciousness. The only thing that has happened with science, with a capital S, is that your consciousness has been usurped by scientists. So scientists have said, well, you know, we know for sure what your consciousness is. Is that not a little bit weird? Someone else has told you what you are. And if you're like me, a normal person, you think that that's the way it is. You just, because one, you need the answer. You need to have these, what the hell am I? I woke up. It's almost like you don't have memory of who you were when you're a kid, and you got to figure out who you are. And so these answers are comforting. And maybe there's nothing wrong with that, right? Maybe we need that little bit of comfort from coming out of the womb of the universe, as well as the womb of our mothers, right? But as you get older, you know for a fact that you have consciousness. When you get your heart broken, when you fall in love, when you succeed, fail, all these different things. These are all great emotions to have, to be honest. Gain, loss. But then you have the mind. A very interesting and important distinction between the body and consciousness. And I never thought about this until I really listened to Hindu gurus talk about it. You know, your mind is the temporary instance or the culmination of instances of thought between your mortal coil and your consciousness. Your mind is the now of the moment. Someone hit you on the back of the head, your mind will turn off for a little while. You won't remember the last 10 minutes of your life or something, right? But I was starting to think about ghosts and the afterlife and this weird world that we live in where you will have people tell you, like me, that they've had these weird experiences that they can't explain. that isn't going to be a coincidence. And then, like for instance, okay, so all the listeners who've listened to a bunch of these are going to roll their eyes, but I've got this Walt Disney thing where I walked into Disneyland, an apparition of him came up to me, not a visual one, but a mental one, sort of my mind's eye, and told me where one of the most famous Imagineers in the world was in the park, which was a place I never go to, and I walked straight to him with a girlfriend with me, and he had his buddy. I've since talked to him about it. So this happened. 2 other people saw it. He saw it. I saw it. He thought it was really strange, especially when I just talked to him a couple months ago. So that happened. I went to the kiddie part of the park, a place I never walk regardless, and I walked straight from the front of the park straight to this guy, and I mean straight to his body, as if he gave me a cell phone call and said, "I'm right here, come right here," and that's what I did. So for me, the afterlife is completely and utterly proven. Spiritual existence is absolutely, utterly proven. I'm not sure how it happens or if he lives there or any of that kind of stuff, but I guarantee you, there could be, it ranges from he lives at the park because he wants to and there's no rules. It could be that I am God and I am you and you are me, and therefore we just project reality, whether this be a simulator or a giant petri dish or whatever. But it's all connected, right? Okay. But now think about this. I'm sure that if you're alive right now and you can hear my voice, you've had someone pass away in your life. A friend, a family member, something. And it could be even someone you don't know, but they were famous or something, and so you like that person, and they've passed. And you're bummed that they're gone. Or you learn about someone who's already gone, like a Nikola Tesla. You're like, damn, that dude was boss, man. He invented electricity. Now think about it. We are not allowed to communicate with these spirits freely. Now some people will tell you that they have this extra communication capability with the other side. Some people can just look at you and see your auras and know what state of mind you're in. I've got stories on all sides of the fence of this. Now, there are some, unfortunately, correlations between people who say they see ghosts and feel ghosts and people who need a lot of attention. Super high maintenance people that essentially live an entire life going, look at me, look at me, look at me. So I find when I find a correlation between that sort of infantile mind and this claim of having all this extra, paranormal communication, I tend to dismiss that person entirely. And it's not that in the back of my mind I say it can't be real. It's just I'd rather get all my information from someone who's a little more stoic, from someone that feels haunted by their abilities, than someone who is ready to join the circus and tell you your future, right? God bless those people too. Let's say that you have a room or something and you can sit alone and you say to the spirits that you believe in 100%, your relatives, friends, whatever, and you say, I want you to be in this room. I want you to communicate with me in some form or fashion. I want you to show yourself in an apparition, even show yourself in my mind's eye. I want you to walk through me and touch me and make me cold or warm or whatever. Right? You come up with all the different techniques that we believe to be the mechanisms of communication between us and the other side. The ones that happen when you don't ask for them, right? I'm always harvesting these sorts of experiences from the people that I trust the most in the world, the people with the highest IQs, the people that are already famous for other things. They need no stories around the campfire to feel important. And when they tell me things, it really wakes me up. One of my most serious friends on planet Earth, who is probably the most cynical person on planet Earth when it comes to paranormal things, doesn't believe in anything. And he's really well adjusted. His mother passed away several years ago, and they cremated her, and she had the wish to have her ashes poured over this gorge. And he said that he was with his wife, and they They dumped out the ashes. And he said that it was unmistakably, the ashes turned into sort of an angel version of his mom and then floated away. And he turns to his wife, who's also very, very stoic and professional and not into these kinds of stories, would be more embarrassed to tell a story like this than to just keep it to their grave, right? That's kind of the personality of both of these, which I love. And he says he turned to her and he said, "Did you see that just now?" And she goes, "Did you see an angel? Did you see a person?" And what's kind of weird is when my grandmother passed on my mom's side, that's exactly the vision I had of her while sort of in the twilight zone of waking up that morning about noon. And I had this sort of like angelic, your relatives dressed in a white, I don't know, some white robish thing hovering over the bed saying, I'm on the other side now and I'm safe. And then 2 to 3 hours later, my mom called and said that she'd passed away the night before. So these are the reasons why I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the spiritual side of the world exists. But now let's go back to our analogy of trying to call them up. Why can't they communicate with us? Let's think about that. Now, there's people like John Edwards who have that television show, which I forgot what channel he was on, but he would communicate with your spirit supposedly and tell you about your life and all this other stuff. And I think he has some pretty amazing, credible moments. They say, he was very upfront with it. He said, "Look, we film 12 to 13 hours a day to create one show because it's so hard to just grab a hold of all these relatives and actually get them to communicate with you." Now, I don't know if I believe that guy or not, but there was a couple in there that were huge, which I've mentioned in previous shows, which I will not repeat. But let's think about why just the basic rules of why a spirit would not be allowed to communicate with you directly. Now, we all know, I think, about Star Trek Next Generations and Up, which has something called a prime directive, whereby they are not allowed to communicate with alien races prior to warp travel. And regardless, they're not allowed to mingle in someone else's affairs, right? If someone says stealing a piece of candy is a capital punishment, they're not allowed to intervene. So now, let's think about the world as a petri dish with us in it, just to make it easy on the mind. We have a relative world. We have a physical state that's here. And then we have this thing called faith. Some of us believe in God, some of us don't. Some of our definitions of God look more like a human being, a white guy, of course. Some of us think it's more of a global consciousness in the universe, maybe the universe itself. But man has the gift of choice. We can do whatever the hell we want that's possible, right? And we can convince ourselves that it's not wrong. Evil people think they're doing something good half the time. Anytime you write a villain into a script, you must write it from a perspective that what they are doing is the right thing to do. It benefits them, and that's all that matters, right? So we're in this place where we essentially are unpolluted by the absolute truth. We live in a total void of truth. And all we have done is sort of work together and communicated with each other to try and determine what is truth. And truth is a very interesting word in this particular context because it really would be all of the answers to all things. And I think that is potentially a definition of hell. In the end, that you know everything and there's no state change. You're just are. You don't have to move. You don't have to think. There doesn't have to be a neuron doing anything because you just have it all in you and you are everything. So I think we're extremely blessed to be in this finite body, right? But what if a ghost or any form of the afterlife were allowed to come in and be a part of you? To show up in your living room whenever you wanted to, greet you at night, in the morning. When you can't find your keys, they telekinetically jiggle them wherever they are. Imagine you had any form of that communication. Well, when you looked at the world at that point, what would you have in terms of choice? Would you have a choice to believe whether or not they existed? I would say no. Depending on what is really true with the universe, there are tons of different religions. What if Buddha showed up? What if Christ showed up at the same exact time, or just Christ? What if Anubis showed up and Zeus, Horus, Queen Semiramis? What if any of these folks showed up when called upon by the believers of that idea? Think about how confused the world would be, but also think about what your choice would be in the world to do what might be called a sin. We don't live in a prison of rules, because you can go break the law right now, right? Now, we usually don't want to, because we have empathy and sympathy for other people, and because we want to create an image of ourselves that is honorable. There has to be a goal in life, a purpose in life, to love life. But I don't know about you, when I have lost someone in my life and I have a conversation with them, obviously a one-way conversation with the belief that they can actually hear me, there's no confirmation really, you know? And so you start to look at the dynamics of the rules that might be in place. And I think it's an interesting exercise because it sort of gives you a perspective of what could be. The reason why the afterlife isn't so visible today. But let's say you're conducting this experiment where we have a nice warehouse, a nice soundproof chamber, whatever. We can turn the lights down, we can turn the lights up, whatever, right? And you start to, we bring someone in, but this way, we bring someone who just recently lost a loved one, a person who loved them, and we know it for a fact. Could be a mother died, and there's a really young daughter in the room, and we know that for a fact that if there was any means possible for that mother to reach out to her daughter, we know it would happen. She would literally slay dragons to get back to her kid and establish a relationship. Now, it's probably happening on a different level, but that's why I want to have this conversation, because it'll get us to what probably does actually occur. And I think that there might be some beauty in figuring this out. But we bring that whole situation together, and the daughter calls to her mom, and we lower the lights quite a bit. And we say, she says, please, if you can move a photon in the room, please do it. If you can show me you're here, please do it. And we wait. And nothing happens. And so we call on every other dimension of the paranormal that we think could be expressed by this person on the other side. Temperature changes, thoughts, mind's eye projections, whatever. And the daughter keeps saying, no, I don't see anything, I don't feel anything. We have sensors all over the room. We don't feel anything, we don't see anything. We have video cameras going on infrared, all this other stuff, and we don't see anything and we don't feel anything. At that point, just as observers, we need to acknowledge the fact that there are either two things happening in that situation, right? Either it's not physically possible for ghosts, which would be the obvious, the intersection between the consciousness of a soul without a body, penetrating this physical reality and creating some registrable metric, temperature, light, whatever. Either it's not physically possible to happen, or it's not allowed. It's not allowed by the universe. And somehow it's either not allowed and restricted by design. You're not allowed to do this. Like, there's no guns, so guns aren't allowed and you can't buy them, so blah, 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 right? Or it's an agreed upon limitation whereby the spirits say, it's not allowed, therefore I shall not do it. At least in those methodologies, right? Now, I have friends that say they have experienced everything that I just told you. And so it seems strange. The duality between people who see people when there is no imperative or great reason to see them, right? My experience with Walt Disney, it was not an imperative. There was nothing amazing about that. I didn't find out anything about myself or the cure to cancer. It was merely this Imagineer who you just met 2 weeks earlier is in the park, and you should go down and say hi to him. There he is. Boom. You will see things on the internet that are hard to believe. Most of this is just special effects people or people with, no knowledge in how cameras work. But there was the security guy from Disney that he either had a hoax pulled on him where it looked like a character walked out of, a human being, ghost character, walked out of the Haunted Mansion, walked across New Orleans, cut across the water, and went over to the boat. It seems that it always occurs when there's no imperative. Now, there's a couple people that I know in history that made commitments to their loved ones, their spouses, that if there was any way they could possibly show themselves, they would. And one was Houdini, and the other one was John Lennon. Now, if I was a betting man, I'd put my money on Houdini any day of the year to pull this off. A man who is mechanically inclined, he was a showman. He was into what he did. He died doing what he loved to do. And his wife, I believe, at the end of her life said there was no indication that he had communicated with me. As the story goes with John Lennon, it was a story that he said that he would float across the room as a feather. And what I find funny about that is that in my lifetime I've seen feathers float across rooms several times, and I had no idea where a feather would have come from besides a pillow, and how did it get elevated in my room to the point where it needed to fall at all. It's really strange. But there are a lot of feathery things in the houses, right? And dudes don't notice them because we're dudes. So there's some rule structure in place. Now I'm going to throw a wild card at you, which is, I don't know if it's pleasant feeling or not, but the notion is this. What if we're in a very humane prison? And who knows how we got sentenced or something. But what if we are in a prison sanctioned away from the instrumentalities? We're sanctioned into instrumentalities such that we have a body, we're limited, we have the fear of the unknown and all this other stuff. Now that's to neglect the total ups and downs of this universe. And again, a very humane prison would be one that you would have a wonderful life in from the perspective of that prison, but you are sanctioned away from the rest of the group because you need to mature. And we all know in this world that we are not perfect. But isn't it interesting how the Old Testament says that you have original sin? Maybe original sin would be the crime that you committed to come here in the first place. And maybe religions on earth that say behave are really trying to get you to behave so that you don't come back over and over and over again. Let me take it one step further. Isn't it weird how the most non-empathetic reptilian brain people run this world? That no matter what happens, these people are the bankers, the controllers, the politicians. They seem to be very odd, but they all seem to be the same. There's never a good guy or a good girl at the top, right? There's not a single king on earth that says that, like Dave Grohl, who's become very successful in music. He's now sort of, I don't need any more money, but I want people to play fair, but I don't need a bunch of money. I can do a concert for nothing. You never have that from a banker. So it would seem that the entire control apparatus is sort of like the prison warden with all the guards. They keep us from being free. It's a weird idea, right? But they could also be the pressure, very orchestrated, I should say, in some sort of petri dish dummy thing. It could be that they're here to help us mature. such that we do learn the lesson that we need to learn. Now imagine too, I'm just going to keep riffing on this one. Imagine too that our journey is very specifically designed to teach us what we need to know, that we got wrong in the previous world somehow. So someone that made someone poor somehow. And I don't really want you to go down this too deeply, but just a perspective that perhaps you have to be in the state that you put someone else in. Now let me switch a word to make this not so dark. Let's take prison, throw that word away, and let's put in school. Maybe this is all about maturing up and becoming ready to join the rest of the universe at some later time. Maybe reincarnation is the way that you just keep going back to school to go through first year, second year, third year, fourth year. It's first life, second life, third life, fourth life. Your graduate's degree and your PhD and all that stuff. There absolutely has to be a reason why we cannot freely communicate with the other side. And once you have an experience, it starts to get very interesting because you can't let go of your experience. Like if you ever saw a ghost one time, would you let anyone tell you that there weren't ghosts? I mean, you might grow up, if you saw it when you were 11 and then you grew up and you're 51, you might go, well, maybe I was just seeing things. I don't know. It seems like it forever ago. But if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s or above, and you're not on any hallucinogenic medication, you're going to trust your experience a hell of a lot more. And especially if you look in your own heart and you go, look, man, I don't need this. I don't need to feel important. So I know I'm not here to tell a tale, because perhaps you're confused within yourself of what just happened, right? So here we are trying to figure out how to have a conversation about the afterlife, about spirituality, about existence. And so I think we just have to put some definitions around things. And again, as a Caucasian American white guy, right? My world is very late to this game. Other cultures have the mega drop on the spirituality realm of the universe and the discussion, right? I once saw a really weird conspiracy online that has to do with the spirit. And it was so bizarre that I think it was really only one guy that was talking about this. And he was a guy that actually said he was in direct communication with grays and beiges. These are the almanite aliens, The beiges are the females, and they're 6 feet tall, and the males are the grays, and they're like around 4 feet tall. And then these are the other little tiny helpers that are supposedly around 3.5 feet tall with round eyes. But he's the guy he's a British guy, and he got up at a podium once and tried to speak a fake language, and again, he looked like a guy that needed attention. But he talked about a shield around Earth that won't let our souls escape once we die. Once we die, the souls bounce off the shield and come back down and become another being. And that we're supposed to be able to escape. But these aliens, these grays, have built this shield around us, right? And it keeps us from being able to leave. And they've just been on top of us forever. I just did a whole run through last night, a bunch of weird stuff. Another related one is that a guy did a podium speech where he said he'd been abducted over 100 times, and he said that the great aliens were not humans. They're more robotic, mechanical bin, which seems to be the new twist on them. And that because they are robotic, they have no empathy or sympathy. They simply just do what they want to do. You can't motivate them at all to react to you because there's nothing there. It's like a bunch of datas from Star Trek without any emotion whatsoever. And so he said you can scream all you want, but you're basically being raped by a toaster. But then I've heard, other theories where they actually are the harvesters of souls, and they are the ones that pass souls out, and that they protect souls. That's their job. And they're this mechanical, physical, race protecting a spiritual entity. I mean, come on, right? The reason why I mention those two weird things is that I want you to start thinking about a potential ecosystem of souls. And think about, again, the idea that infinity is sort of a curse and a burden. You don't want all the answers, because then you just freeze. There's not one of these situations where you have all the answers and then you have any desires after that moment. What would a desire be? A desire would be filling a void, having an experience because you haven't had it before, having an experience because you're trying to change the state of your mind. Why do you ride a roller coaster? Because you're not riding one right now. And with all knowledge, it no longer appeals to you. When you grow up and you stop eating sweets, it typically goes something like this. You wanted them when you didn't have them. Then when you get your own money, let's just say you love Snickers, and you're eating a ton of Snickers, and you think it tastes good. Of course, they taste awful now because it's all the ingredients are GMO'd, but let's just say it's the freshest 1979 Snickers you've ever eaten in your life, and you had to have a case of them frozen somewhere, and you're just eating the crap out of them. Well, eventually, when you think about eating one, you automatically taste it, because the memory pattern in your mind recreates based on a memory of it happening. And so eventually you stop eating candy, typically, because your memory's strong. And you just go, oh yeah, I always think a donut tastes good, smells good until I take a couple bites, and then that weird sourdough taste happens, and then I feel bloated and gross afterwards, and I feel guilty, and I look at my gut and I hate it. Like, all those things start to replay in your mind, and that's why you stop, right? So when thinking about an ecosystem of your soul and your consciousness, the void is your friend. And we have to accept the fact that that's a good thing. There's this whole flat earth, round earth debate, right? And everyone has gone into protection mode, pretty much, right? Some people are very religious and they go into protection mode and say, well, of course, the Bible's never told a lie, and it talks about the firmament. Even the Book of Mormon talks about the firmament, right? And then you have folks that look around things in the sky and say, well, looks like everything's round out there. By the way, I just read an article this morning about the fact that stars are disappearing out of the sky, and how that might signify alien intelligence. Really. We have these round balls falling out of the sky, these round metal spheres falling out of the sky all over the world, right? And stars are also disappearing. What do they used to call meteorites? Oh yeah, falling stars. Right? Like a lamp that falls out of the sky. Now, could you imagine? I'm going to throw a zinger at you, a weird one. I keep mentioning the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In the second book, there's a part of the book that's hilarious where two of our main characters go into a warehouse and find a derelict spacecraft. But it's still hooked up to the power. And they put a oscilloscope up to it, and they listen, and they're like, oh my God, there's people in there. I can hear conversations. And they go inside, and every passenger is in there in stasis. And while they're in there, it all reanimates, and everyone starts screaming, run for the exits, right? And they're in there like, oh my God, what's going on here? And the computers and the robots are all saying, please take your seats, please take your seats. And this backstory behind this spacecraft is that it was in there, and it was taxiing when some catastrophe happened in the real world, and there's no more destination to go to. And so the AI is essentially put all the passengers in the plane in stasis, waiting for society to be rebuilt such that the plane actually has someplace to go. If you've never read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I'd say go get the BBC broadcast collection off iTunes, but the old 78 to 82 version. Okay, first two books. Now, what if this dome that we're in, let's just say we're in a dome. What if it's a derelict experiment that has enough power supply and automation that runs forever? Well, I mean, like a long time. And we're in it. But now it's falling apart. The stars are falling out of the firmament dome, or fuck if I know, like wherever it's hanging off a string or whatever, right? And, someone's explored the borders and they've said, oh my God, it's a desolate, apocalyptic world outside the dome, and it doesn't matter. Like, we don't want the people inside, our fellow man, to ever find out. So this is all we've got, because there's no food outside. It's toxic outside. We got to stay in this dome. We're lucky to be here. Someone protected us. So now we have to control population. We have to be happy in here and keep everyone ignorant of the dome. But this thing is catching on like wildfire, right? So it's got a lot of science that needs to be developed so that we can prove it's round again, right? Ecosystem of the soul. I think the most basic trait of the ecosystem of the soul would be reincarnation. Now, some people see that as a form of hell. For some reason, believing in Santa Claus again and believing in magic again and falling in love for the first time again, it sounds like a horrible idea to them. I think it's really odd. Now, just coming at this from a layman's standpoint, my hope, which is completely arbitrary and probably cowardice a little bit on my part, is that if there is reincarnation, that we have a break, that we do get a little bit of time as a spiritual being to sort of hug and shake hands with loved ones and friends, maybe learn a little bit, and then come back down. And hopefully, in this ecosystem of a soul, the fourth dimension, which is time, doesn't apply once you're outside of your mortal coil, which is utterly burdened by state change, time, illusion. But if we're to have these conversations like we're having right now, albeit very one way, we have to be able to quickly engage the area of theory that we have put our mind to. But how many people in the world have you ever talked to that said, oh, I've been studying consciousness for 4 months, and the relationship between consciousness and the mind, consciousness and love, consciousness and death. I've really thought it through, and I've really studied my own emotions, because the interesting thing is the laboratory for these research projects is your body and your mind and your consciousness. It is the 2-foot halo around your body. That's your laboratory. Every time you hug someone, love something, look in the mirror, love yourself, doubt yourself, whatever, all these experiences are essentially results from a test. What did it feel like to hug someone else? I'm always saying on the show, go Skype with someone and then walk around the corner and be with them. Skype in a way you can't hear the thunder of their voice around the corner of the room, right? Skype where you're completely so far away you can't hear each other in the real world. And then go and hug each other, look each other in the eye, and tell me there's a massive, massive difference in the lucidity of existence between two people. Now let me do some state changes for you guys, so when you go out and think about this kind of stuff, you're in the right frame of mind, or a more correct frame of mind. Have you ever felt small in the world? Have you ever felt small in a class structure? Small, meaning you aren't as privileged as rich people? If you have ever felt a level discrepancy between yourself and someone else, then there needs to be a massive perspective change within your consciousness and your mind and your body. Regardless of how intelligent you are, regardless of how whatever metric you pretty, whatever, you are a 100% being. You may not be as conscious as someone else, and you might be more conscious than all of us, but you are a 100% being. And I want to suggest the emotional thought that you might want to practice having. And I don't think you'll hear this from scientists, and I do not think you're going to hear this from established religions, maybe a Shirley MacLaine religion. But try thinking for a split second that this entire simulation that we call reality is 100% yours. You own everything. You own everything. You own your children. You own your wife. You own the mall. You own the planet. You own the oxygen. You own space. You own the firmament. You own it all. That you really are the center of this universe. You, not your planet, not your galaxy, your solar system. Your very consciousness is an instance of reality that is then side by side with all the other levels of consciousness around you. So if you believe I exist as a consciousness, that I have my own universe, and just like the holographic universe theory, my transverse energy waves that come off of me that project my reality, which are sanctioned by a state change of time. Remember, longitudinal waves are instantaneous, right? It's like holding a pole between us that's solid, and I push the pole and you immediately feel it in your hand, right? Transverse waves are like waves, right? They take a little while to travel, and they also soften and feather. Maybe our universes are only millimeters off the surface of our body. Maybe it's just a 9-inch ball around our pineal gland. Who knows what it is? None of this really has to exist for us to feel like it exists. It's just like Neo in the Matrix. He literally had a physical body. He was being drained like a battery, but in his mind, he was sort of living in a literal dream state. An artificial program based on a previous civilization that had been erased by robots and AI. But why tell you that you're at the center of the universe? I think because the main benefit of that is you will stop allowing outside forces to cloud your vision of what probably is your reality. Because you do exist, right? You think, therefore you are. Because at the beginning of all experiments, there's typically a very simple set of circumstances that are set up in the laboratory, right? Even if you're going to study chaos theory, you will typically create a state of order that is then systematically made chaotic, and you get to watch the experiment, just like Stephen Wolfram and his experiments for randomness in the universe. You know, his thought process was the more unique particles that you have in the universe, the more randomness you get, and he found out it was completely the inverse. So if he had overcomplicated his experiment and didn't move up from 1 particle, 2 particle, all the way up to several hundred particles, he wouldn't have realized that 3 to 4 is really the magic key. That everything else creates patterns. So if you're to ever look at yourself objectively, then you clear the whole slate of reality and you put yourself in the middle. And then you want to examine yourself as closely as possible, as non-emotionally as possible. If you have a lot of chaos around you in your life that's controlling you, then I want you to maybe find a quiet place in the world. I don't care if you got to go to a park, sit in your car, find the back room to the house, somewhere where you're not disturbed by anything that you don't add to yourself. Get peaceful and just open your eyes and open your soul, open your consciousness. Typically, we are having a stream of feelings constantly, right? But we don't acknowledge it. Well, if there's ever going to be a sign, if there's ever going to be a key to decrypt this enigma box, which is reality, we're going to have to plug into that consciousness, plug into those feelings, and see where it takes us. Now, the challenge is that we have a couple multipliers when it comes to our physical feelings. I'll give you some examples. Now, you know that we are in a mortal coil, and if we take drugs, it will alter the state of our mind, and we don't think clearly. Or perhaps we think very clearly. Who knows, right? I think caffeine from iced tea makes me think extremely clearly. So we are subjugated a little bit to our mortal coil. And that's an amplifier with several variables in it that takes whatever pure consciousness we have in the universe, it puts the brain on top of it. If you take care of your body and take care of your brain, get rid of all the toxins out of your pineal gland, out of your bloodstream, which is very difficult today, then we get to have pure consciousness. Beautiful, beautiful consciousness. But I think that most of us would probably agree that we have been so many decades into allowing these reptilian, R-factor brain people, I don't mean that literally like David Icke, but just these really non-empathetic people run the world. They have no mirror neurons, in their mind. That we're probably not going to get an absolute experiment of who we are. I bet we can get pretty damn close. But now let me give you a separate consciousness feeling that you have had, which I believe is unadulterated and perfect. How many of you have ever said, I had a gut feeling that I was doing something stupid. I neglected to acknowledge that gut feeling, and it ended up being the dumbest thing I ever did in my life. I second-guessed myself, is how they say it. I can raise my hand as high as I possibly can in Cotter's class, and I will say to you, every single time I've ever gone against my gut instinct, I have lost miserably. My biggest failures in life is doubting myself. And there's that old joke that says, when someone says, you don't think you make any mistakes, do you? And you say, well, I have made a mistake in my life, and that's when I thought I made a mistake, but I really hadn't. But your gut instinct, which is what Asians really talk about, what's your gut tell you? What's your gut tell you? What the Asians have figured out, whether or not they have completely wrapped a forum around it of discussion, I don't know, is that they understand that the gut is one of the most pure connections between yourself and your consciousness. Your gut feeling doesn't have the now attached to it as a bias mechanism, right? Your gut feeling doesn't have a modifier attached to it with a variable on it. Your gut feeling comes in pure, like a softball being pitched right into your gut with the truth. And that's why you got to listen to it. That's why you got to listen to it. So now imagine we're trying to conduct experiments to figure out who the hell we are and what the hell we are. And you guys all listen to that idea that the gut is the pure cannon of truth that shoots through your system every once in a while. The more subtle version of that is what you might call intuition. In my mind, I just do a little thing, and I don't want to pollute your bias in any way, shape, or form, but so I want to preface what I'm about to say by take this with a grain of salt for yourself. The way I choose to interpret these two emotions, gut and intuition, because they're related, right? A gut feeling is what I would call an extremely obtuse, or actually, you know what? Yeah, I think I'll say obtuse. To put it in a physical analogy, for any of you who've seen cannons, the old pirate cannons or the old Civil War cannons where they literally put a giant ball of lead or iron or whatever into a cannon and blasted it. The gut feeling for me is like an 8-inch ball going through my gut, just tearing a hole in me like the T2, right? Intuition, for me, feels like this. It feels like a butterfly landing on my ears. It feels like a slight breeze flowing over my head. And intuition, I'm just going to tell you, for me, intuition is something that happens at the pineal gland level, right around here, around my face. It's very specific to its location. The gut feeling is in your gut. The gut feeling is robotic. It is a binary, yes, no, good, bad feeling for me personally. The gut's just, don't do that. Don't do that. You're going to, or do that. Definitely. Go for it. Now. Go, go, go. And intuition is your more ornate. Well, you might want to think about this. Well, if you go that way, this is going to happen. If you go that way, this other thing's going to happen. Both of them are fine, but they're mutually exclusive. You're going to get A or B, but not A and B. So just think about it. Now, as I've said several times on the show, I think that life is made out of millions and billions of tiny little decisions, but what we're taught is that it's only the big decisions you make. So to translate it to our analogy, society says that the world is run by gut feelings. Only when you get a massive gut feeling or is anything significant happening to you in your life. Well, now rewind your life for a split second. Wasn't it all of the little guys that kind of curved the trajectory of your ship to be in that particular area of the sea that made you make a decision? And, if you listen to your intuition, a lot of times it will be just as productive as your gut feeling. Now, to add another metaphor on top of that I use personally, is that I believe that the gut emotions are more like a godlike emotion, more like the universe giving me a big, giant binary indicator. And intuition for me feels more like the spirits that have passed on whispering into my ear. It's the difference between a coarse brush and a fine brush. A punch in the gut versus a Ferengi lobe massage, right? That's an inside joke for all you Star Trek people. I still don't know what to call this show. But I think that the overall purpose of this show is to heighten our vocabulary and our intuition about the vocabulary and how the system works, to really get into the science of consciousness that is ridiculed if you so much as acknowledge it exists. Right? You have people, these left-brain scientists who cannot think about consciousness. They merely break it down like Kurzweil and say it's just a bunch of chemicals and trigger systems in the brain. It's all neurons. I think we all want more from life than that. And I think we all deserve more life than that. If the two ideas that I threw at you, which is this is a penal colony, a very humane one for a lot of us, or if this is an educational center, and there is somehow an ascension out of this captivity onto perhaps a much more interesting form of existence, whether it be pure consciousness or another petri dish someplace else, I'm going to guess that if there's any truth to that, because there appear to be rules with our communication with the afterlife. We're not allowed to do it fluently, at least. It could be a parlor trick, hey, go find a guy in the amusement park, but it can't be a direct communication with a dead relative for some reason or something, on anything more than I'm okay, right? I think that if we heighten our discussion, heighten our awareness, heighten the mechanisms that we use to engage this reality, then we have a better chance of maturing who we are. If we're prisoners with original sin, if that's what that means, well, obviously, the bummer is that if this was a penal colony, that we wouldn't know what crime we committed in the previous world. The only logic would be that this world that we actually have right now, whoever you are right now in the universe and where you are and the family and friends that you have and the experiences that you're going to have, perhaps you are being forced to live under the thumb that you put someone else in the previous universe. And so the punishment is simply you get to experience the horror that you did for someone else, as however subtle it might be or whatever. But if this is just an educational center to make us better, more sentient consciousness globs in the universe, then this sort of conversation has massive implications for us being who we want to be in the world, or in the universe, I should say, in the infinite cosmos of wherever the hell we are. And I would say that even if we're programs in a computer, it would seem that someone has given us, if that's the case, sentient thought, and they care about us on some level. Maybe that's just wishful thinking. Maybe we're just some college student experiment that within a millisecond of his or her life, or its life, we live 1,000 lives, right? For any of you who've watched the show Black Mirror and seen episode 1 of season 3, which is all there is in season 3 because there's 3 episodes in 1, maybe we're living in an egg, right? You got to go see that if you haven't seen it. Okay, I think I beat this horse up from several different angles. Poor horse. If you haven't already, go to mkultraradio.com. All the links are there. The video's there if you're coming through audio. Audio's there if you're coming through video. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.